They called him the handsome prince. But behind the charm, the tailored suits, and the royal smile, Prince George, Duke of Kent, lived a life the palace never wanted you to know. He was the first modern royal, glamorous, daring, dangerously magnetic. Women adored him. Men whispered about him. And the British crown tried to contain him. The younger brother of King George VI and uncle to Queen Elizabeth II, George was everything a prince shouldn't be: flamboyant, passionate, and deeply troubled. He moved through the jazz age with reckless grace, hosting secret parties, dabbling in drugs, and breaking every rule of royal decorum. His lovers included actresses, socialites, and men. He was married to Princess Marina of Greece, but the marriage was a facade of royal perfection covering a storm of forbidden desires. The press called him sensitive. The palace called him a problem. And the truth was locked behind closed doors. Then, in 1942, during World War II, his story ended as mysteriously as it began. A plane crash in the Scottish Highlands killed him instantly. Officially, it was an accident. Unofficially, rumors said otherwise. Why was a royal prince flying on a secret mission? Why was there a briefcase found near his body that the government refused to discuss? And why, even decades later, are parts of his military records still classified? He was royal by birth, rebel by nature, and lost to history by design. Because Prince George didn't just die in a crash, he died in scandal. Long before the scandal, before the whispers, before the crash, there was a boy born into perfection. Prince George Edward Alexander Edmund, Duke of Kent, entered the world on the 20th of December 1902, at Sandringham House, the same royal estate where generations of kings and queens had come into being. He was the fourth son of King George V and Queen Mary, born into a family obsessed with duty, image, and silence. But George was different from the start. Where his brothers Edward, Albert, and Henry were disciplined and dutiful, George was sensitive, artistic, and strikingly handsome. Even as a child, his tutors described him as curious and emotional, too aware of beauty. He played the piano, loved ballet, and read French poetry. In a family of soldiers and statesmen, he was the artist who never fit the uniform. The British royal family in the early 20th century was a cage made of gold, beautiful, inescapable, and suffocating. Emotion was weakness, desire was shame, and individuality was dangerous. George would test all three. He grew up in the shadow of his elder brothers. Edward, the charming rebel who would become King Edward VIII and later abdicate for love, and Albert, the shy, stammering man who became King George VI, the reluctant monarch. George was the spare, too far from the throne to matter, too close to the crown to be free. But his beauty made him unforgettable. By his 20s, he was considered the most handsome man in Europe. He moved with elegance, spoke with warmth, and had a magnetic presence that drew people to him like moths to flame. Aristocrats adored him, artists worshipped him, and the tabloids, when they dared to whisper, called him the modern prince. Unlike his brothers, he was fascinated by the world beyond the palace gates. He embraced the jazz age, nightclubs, fast cars, forbidden liaisons. He befriended writers, musicians, and actors, people the royals considered scandalous. But George didn't just live among them, he belonged among them. In the 1,920 seconds, his life became a swirl of London parties and private indulgences. He was known to visit bohemian salons, the private clubs where men danced with men and women smoked opium under dim chandeliers. It was there that he met Noel Coward, the playwright and actor rumored to be one of his lovers. Others whispered about affairs with Jorge Ferrara, a dashing Argentinian diplomat, and even Barbara Cartland, the future romance novelist. He was married to Princess Marina of Greece and Denmark, a woman of impeccable grace and royal lineage, in 1934. Their wedding was the event of the decade, attended by kings, queens, and a young Elizabeth. But behind the photographs of smiles and tiaras, George's private life was already spiraling. He struggled with addiction, first morphine, then cocaine, then sleeping pills. It wasn't mere indulgence, it was escape. From the pressure, from the double life, from the expectation to be perfect while hiding everything real about himself. He was, as one palace aide once described, a man living two lives in a world that allowed him neither. By the 1,930 seconds, Prince George, Duke of Kent, was living the kind of life the British monarchy pretended didn't exist. He was charming, beautiful, dangerously intelligent, and already drifting towards scandal. On paper, he was a model royal, a decorated officer in the Royal Navy and later the Royal Air Force, a husband to Princess Marina, and a father to 3 children. But beneath the uniform and the polite smiles was a man fighting his own nature, torn between duty and desire. George had everything, and yet nothing that truly belonged to him. He spent nights in smoky London clubs, drinking champagne with actors, musicians, and aristocrats who thrived on danger. One of his closest friends was Noel Coward, the witty playwright whose charm hid a secret that mirrored George's own. Both men loved other men in a world where that truth could destroy them. Their friendship, by royal standards, was too intimate. Private letters later destroyed by the palace were said to be filled with affection that went beyond camaraderie. He also had affairs with women, many of them. Rumors tied him to Kiki Preston, an American socialite nicknamed the girl with the silver syringe for her open cocaine use. She and George shared a bond of decadence and destruction, fueled by drugs and secrecy. Some claimed he fathered her child, a rumor so explosive that even decades later it remains buried under royal denial. But George's scandals weren't just romantic, they were political. As Europe edged toward war, George found himself drawn into dangerous circles. He was fascinated by avant-garde thinkers, artists, and some claimed by political extremists. He reportedly met with members of the British Union of Fascists, led by Oswald Mosley, and even corresponded with German officials before the war. The palace dismissed these claims as exaggerated, but whispers persisted that his sympathies, or at least his curiosity, made him a liability. When war finally broke out in 1939, the monarchy needed to protect its image. King George VI assigned his brother to public service within the Royal Air Force, a polite way to keep him occupied, supervised, and out of trouble. But George didn't want to be managed. He wanted to matter. He threw himself into duty, inspecting bases, visiting troops, and to his surprise, finding meaning in service. Yet even then, addiction followed him. His dependency on morphine deepened, and he became increasingly unpredictable. By 1942, the war was in full swing, and so were the rumors. Some said George was being sent on a special mission to Sweden, a neutral country, to negotiate a secret deal. Others said he was being quietly removed from London, his behavior having become too erratic for royal safety. On the 25th of August 1942, Prince George boarded a short Sunderland flying boat in Inverness, Scotland. The official story: he was en route to Iceland on official RAF business. But what happened next remains one of the most mysterious royal tragedies in history. The plane crashed into a mountainside near Dunbeath, killing everyone on board except one survivor. George's body was found among the wreckage, his uniform torn, his signet ring still on his hand. Beside him, according to unverified reports, was a briefcase that the authorities confiscated immediately, its contents never disclosed. The government's explanation? Pilot error. The palace's reaction? Silence. But among those who knew him, whispers spread like wildfire. Why was a prince on a secret flight? What was in that briefcase? And why were parts of his RAF file sealed for 100 years? The beautiful prince had lived his life in mystery, and he died in one too. After the crash, Britain grieved, but the palace went silent. Prince George, Duke of Kent, was buried with full royal honors. The newspapers printed the official line, "Killed in the line of duty." No questions, no details, no explanations. But behind the marble facade of royal mourning, the whispers grew louder. Why had a royal prince who wasn't a pilot been flying on a classified mission during wartime? Why did witnesses report seeing a mysterious briefcase carried from the wreckage before the military arrived? And why did the Royal Air Force seal his file for 100 years, long after every other casualty record from 1942 had been made public? The story didn't make sense, and maybe it was never meant to. The official version claimed that the Sunderland flying boat hit the mountainside due to poor visibility, but investigators and locals told a different story. The weather was clear, the flight path was wrong, and there were reports quickly suppressed that Prince George himself had been in the cockpit. One survivor, Flight Sergeant Andrew Jack, was rescued badly injured. He said little publicly, but according to fragments of testimony later circulated, the prince had been in good spirits before the flight and might have been taking the controls moments before the crash. If true, it meant the prince had disobeyed orders and died in the middle of a reckless act. But others believed something deeper was at play. Some theorized that the mission was not military at all. A number of historians suggest George was en route to Sweden on a covert diplomatic mission, possibly to contact German officials through neutral channels. Others believed he was being sent away from London, either for his own safety or to silence a growing scandal. Because by 1942, the palace had a problem it could no longer contain. Prince George's private life had become impossible to hide. The drugs, the parties, the lovers. His affair with Kiki Preston, the glamorous American socialite, had been the talk of Europe, an intoxicating relationship that spiraled into destruction. Kiki was addicted to cocaine and morphine, and so was he. Together, they had become a mirror of each other's self-destruction. Years later, she would leap from a New York hotel window. Some said she was still haunted by the prince who died before her. There were also whispers of male lovers' relationships that would have been not just scandalous, but criminal. Noel Coward, the playwright and actor, was rumored to have shared an affair with him that both men took to the grave. There were other names too. Anthony Blunt, later exposed as a Soviet spy and part of the Cambridge Five, was alleged by some to have had connections to George through secret London circles of artists and intellectuals. In an era when homosexuality was illegal and punishable by prison, the Duke of Kent's rumored bisexuality was a crisis the crown could never admit. He was, to the establishment, both a prince and a danger, a royal whose desires could shatter the illusion of moral purity the monarchy depended on. So when his plane went down, the silence wasn't just grief, it was containment. Even after his death, the royal family worked to erase the details of his life. Letters were destroyed, associates quietly disappeared from social circles, and the official record became a careful fiction, neat, sanitized, loyal. But history doesn't forget beauty, and it doesn't forget contradiction. Prince George was both sinner and saint, addict and aristocrat, loyal royal and quiet rebel. He was the first Windsor who truly lived like a modern celebrity and paid the price of it. The crash took his body. The palace buried his truth. But the legend, the bisexual prince, the fallen angel of the royal family, never stopped haunting the crown. Because deep down, the most dangerous thing about Prince George wasn't his scandal. It was his honesty. From this channel's perspective, Prince George, Duke of Kent, represents one of the most human and most tragic figures in modern royal history. His story isn't just about scandal. It's about the suffocating weight of image and the quiet desperation of a man born into a world that demanded perfection at the cost of truth. Prince George lived at a time when royalty wasn't allowed to feel. They were symbols, not people. And yet, here was a man who felt everything. He was curious, emotional, sensual, and self-aware, all things the British monarchy was built to suppress. His beauty became his armor, his charm, his camouflage. But behind the charm was someone fighting to exist in a family that couldn't acknowledge who he truly was. The palace would have preferred him obedient, dull, and invisible. Instead, he became magnetic, drawn to art, music, and pleasure, to those who lived outside the boundaries of royal respectability. He was the first Windsor to truly reflect modern humanity, its addictions, contradictions, and desires. And that was his undoing. Because the monarchy doesn't forgive imperfection. It hides it. It thrives on silence. And silence is what killed him, not the mountain, not the crash, but the decades of repression that drove him towards self-destruction. George's bisexuality, his substance abuse, and his longing for freedom were not crimes. They were symptoms of what happens when a man is trapped inside a system that only values appearances. He was born into gold and died searching for authenticity. Even today, his name is barely spoken in royal documentaries. He has been reduced to a footnote, the forgotten brother, the wartime casualty, the scandal they buried. But his life, when you truly look at it, was a mirror reflecting a truth the monarchy still struggles to face. That power without freedom is its own kind of prison. Prince George was the first royal to live like a celebrity, glamorous, adored, and lonely. He was also the first to prove that even kings bleed quietly behind their crowns. His story reminds us that history isn't written by the rebels, it's written by those who survived them. And the British royal family made sure this rebel prince was remembered only in fragments. But fragments still shine. And maybe that's enough. In the quiet of St. George's Chapel, his name is carved into stone, Prince George, Duke of Kent. No inscription of how he lived. No hint of who he was. Just a date, a title, and the silence of a family that still doesn't speak his name. But history has a way of remembering what the powerful try to forget. Even now, more than 80 years later, his story lingers, whispered in biographies, buried in declassified files, and immortalized in the hearts of those who recognize the pain behind perfection. Because Prince George wasn't just another royal casualty. He was a man who wanted to be free. He loved too boldly for his time. He felt too deeply for his title. And in the end, he became the embodiment of every truth the monarchy could not bear to admit, that beauty and rebellion often come from the same place, the desire to live without fear. They called him the beautiful prince, and he was, but he was also the broken one, a man who looked like a god but felt like a ghost. Some say his plane crash was fate, others say it was design, but maybe it was something simpler, the inevitable end of a man too alive for a world that prized obedience over honesty. The monarchy buried his story beneath medals and ceremony, but you can still feel him in every royal photo where someone looks away too soon. In every whispered secret, the crown keeps hidden behind its smile. Prince George, Duke of Kent, the bisexual prince, the lost brother, the shadow behind the throne, he lived like a secret, died like a mystery, and became the kind of legend only silence can create. Some stories fade when the truth is buried. His only grew brighter, because some lives are too wild to be forgotten, and some stories were never meant to be known. But now,